The phone rang only once before the man answered. Hello? It wasn't a paramedic who spoke, nor a dispatcher, nor anyone trained for emergencies. It was Damian Ward, a billionaire investor sitting alone in his glass-walled office, 40 stories above the city, staring at a skyline that no longer impressed him. On the other end of the line, a trembling voice whispered, "My mommy fell down. She's not moving. Please, help her." For a heartbeat, Damian thought it was a prank. Then he heard the sound of a child crying, soft and real, the kind of sound you can't fake. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, standing already, "tell me where you are." Apartment 3B, the girl stammered. "On Carter Street. Please, hurry." He could hear her panic breaking through every word. Damian didn't ask how she got his number. He just grabbed his jacket, barked a command at his driver, and was gone before logic could catch up to him. Carter Street looked like a place the city had forgotten. The streetlights flickered like dying candles, and the buildings leaned inward, tired of standing. Damian's SUV stopped in front of a faded red brick complex with boarded windows. He got out before the driver could open his door. "Stay here," he ordered. Inside, the stairwell smelled of dust and rust. Every creak echoed. By the time he reached the third floor, he could hear the muffled sobs from behind one door, 3B. He knocked once, firm but calm. "Sophie?" The sobbing stopped. Then a small voice from the other side. "Are you the ambulance man?" "No," he said, "but I'm here to help." The lock turned. The door opened a few inches. A little girl with tangled brown hair stared up at him, her face streaked with tears. She couldn't have been more than 7. Behind her on the kitchen floor, a woman lay unconscious, pale still, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath her. Damian dropped to his knees beside her. "What happened?" Sophie clutched his sleeve. "She just fell. She was making soup, and then she fell down, and I couldn't wake her up." He felt for a pulse, weak but steady, her breathing shallow. "Did you call anyone else?" he asked. Sophie shook her head, terrified. "I tried the number I saw on the fridge. It said for help, but I think I called wrong." He glanced at the fridge. A faded emergency contact list taped there. Ambulance, police, doctor, and somehow a phone number he recognized. His number. A misprint from a long-forgotten charity flyer, the kind his company used to hand out with donation forms. He exhaled sharply. "You called the right person, Sophie." Her eyes widened, uncertain. "Really?" He nodded. "Really." He lifted the woman gently, her skin cool against his hands. "We need to get your mom to a hospital," he said. "Can you grab a blanket?" Sophie rushed to the couch, dragging one twice her size. Damian wrapped it around the woman's shoulders and carried her carefully down the stairs. The SUV door opened before he could say a word. "St. Marine's Hospital," Damian told the driver. "Now." Sophie climbed in beside him, clutching her mother's hand. The engine roared to life. Under the fluorescent lights of the ER, time stretched thin. Nurses swarmed around Elena Ruiz. 4 lines, monitors, questions. Damian stood just outside the chaos, feeling like an intruder in a life he'd never lived. A doctor finally approached. "She's stable, likely hypoglycemic shock. We'll need to run tests, but she should recover." Sophie's small hand tugged his sleeve again. "Is she going to be okay?" "She will," he said, kneeling to her level. "You did the right thing calling me." She hesitated. "But I didn't mean to." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the wrong call is the right one." The words surprised him as much as her. Hours later, when Elena finally stirred, the first thing she saw was a stranger in an expensive suit sitting beside her hospital bed. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled, his phone untouched on the table. She blinked, disoriented. "Who are you?" "I'm Damian Ward," he said quietly. "Your daughter called me when you fainted." She frowned, confused. "My daughter called you?" "It was an accident," he said, "but it saved your life." Her gaze flickered toward the doorway, where Sophie sat curled in a plastic chair, fast asleep under a nurse's blanket. "She must have been so scared," Elena whispered. "She was," Damian admitted, "but she didn't give up." Elena tried to sit up. "I can't pay." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Just rest. I'll make sure you both get home safe." She studied him for a long moment, unsure whether to thank him or mistrust him. There was something about him, an intensity, an edge that didn't belong to a man doing a good deed. "Why did you come?" she asked finally. Damien looked down at his hands. "Because when I picked up that phone, I heard something I hadn't heard in years." "What's that?" "Someone who needed me." Outside the room, he paused by the window, watching dawn bleed into the horizon. The city looked smaller from here, fragile, almost human. Behind him, the nurse spoke softly. "You family?" He hesitated. "No, just someone who answered." The nurse smiled kindly. "Well, Mr. Someone, you might have saved her life tonight." Maybe, or maybe she just saved his. The hospital smelled faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. Morning sunlight pooled through the blinds, cutting soft stripes across the white sheets where Elena Ruiz rested, pale but awake. She stirred when she heard the squeak of sneakers in the hallway. Her daughter's voice came next, soft but bright. "Mommy, can I come in now?" Elena smiled faintly. "Of course, sweetheart." Sophie ran to her side and clambered up onto the bed. The little girl's hair was a mess, her eyes red from crying, but her smile lit the room. "You scared me," she said, trying to sound brave. "You fell down and didn't wake up." Elena smoothed her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "I know, baby. I'm sorry." Behind Sophie, the door opened quietly. Damien Ward stepped in, a coffee cup in each hand. He looked strangely out of place in the small, faded room, a man carved from another world. The expensive coat slung over his arm, the quiet command in his movements, even the way the nurses seemed to part around him. He handed her one of the cups. "Decaf," he said. "Figured the real stuff could wait." Elena hesitated. "You didn't have to come back." "Maybe not," he said, setting the other cup on the side table. "But I wasn't sure you had anyone else." Her eyes softened, though her tone stayed guarded. "You don't even know me." "I know you raised a brave kid," he said. "That's enough for me." Sophie giggled from the bed. "He helped you, Mommy. He carried you down the stairs like Superman." Damien chuckled under his breath. "I think Superman would have managed without hitting every stair on the way down." Elena laughed quietly despite herself. Then she grew serious. "I don't know how to thank you, or even how you got here." "Sophie said she called the wrong number." He nodded, eyes drifting toward the floor. "My office line used to sponsor an emergency charity program years ago. Looks like someone reused one of our flyers for your building's contact sheet. So she called a billionaire instead of an ambulance." His lips twitched. "Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. Or a miracle," she said softly. He didn't reply. For a moment, neither did she. Later that morning, after Sophie was coaxed into the hallway with a juice box, Elena turned to Damien. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Ward. You've done more than enough." "It's Damien," he corrected gently. "And if you're planning to argue gratitude, don't bother. I'm stubborn." "You're also busy, I'm sure." He shrugged. "Not in ways that matter." That answer seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him for a moment, noticing what most people probably missed, the tiredness behind the polished demeanor, the faint shadow under his eyes. "What do you do exactly?" she asked. "Mostly paperwork and pretending to enjoy meetings," he said dryly. "I run an investment firm and a few charities. The paperwork part's the same either way." Elena smiled faintly. "So you save people for a living?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Not really. Mostly, I just move money around and hope it lands somewhere useful." There was something in the way he said it, a quiet disillusionment, like a man who'd built a kingdom and realized too late it was made of glass. The doctor came in shortly after, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Ruiz, your blood sugar levels dropped dangerously low. We'll need to adjust your diet and maybe look into some long-term monitoring." Elena nodded. "I've been working 2 shifts and skipping meals. I didn't think it would—" "Almost kill you?" The doctor interrupted gently. "It's a good thing someone got you here when they did." Damien stood by the window pretending not to listen, but Elena could feel his attention even as he looked away. When the doctor left, she sighed. "I don't have insurance. The clinic I used to work at doesn't cover—" "I'll take care of it," Damien said immediately. She froze. "Excuse me. The bill? The tests? Whatever you need." No, she said quickly. Absolutely not. I don't take charity. It's not charity, he said quietly. It's thanks for reminding me what real emergencies look like. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. There was no arrogance in his voice, no pity, just a weary sincerity she couldn't quite refuse. Fine, she said finally. But only this once. He smiled faintly. We'll see. By the time Sophie returned, the air between them had softened. Damien helped her gather her mother's things and escorted them out to the curb. The autumn wind carried the smell of rain and city dust. Sophie looked up at him with wide eyes. Will we see you again? Elena started to answer, but Damien beat her to it. Only if your mom doesn't mind. Elena met his gaze, uncertain, then nodded once. You can stop by if you like, but no more bills, no more favors. Deal, he said. Sophie smiled like she'd just won something. You can bring cookies next time. Damien laughed quietly. Cookies. Got it. As the taxi pulled away, he stood on the curb, hands in his pockets, watching the taillights fade. He didn't understand why he couldn't just walk away. Maybe it was the little girl's voice still echoing in his head. Maybe it was the way Elena looked at him, like she wanted to trust him but didn't dare. Or maybe it was something simpler. For the first time in years, Damien Ward had been called for help, and for once he'd answered. The following morning, Damien was halfway through a board meeting when he stopped hearing the numbers. His CFO was droning on about quarterly returns, but the words melted into static. All he could think about was a little girl with tangled hair and a mother who'd smiled through exhaustion. He hadn't planned to see them again, but plans rarely survived contact with conscience. When the meeting ended, he signed the reports automatically and told his assistant, Cancel my afternoon. She blinked. All of it, sir. All of it. The drive back to Carter Street was shorter this time. The black SUV gleamed against the rows of rusted cars and cracked sidewalks, a piece of another world that didn't belong here. He found the apartment by memory, door 3B. He hesitated only a second before knocking. It opened a crack, the chain still on. Elena's voice came through, wary. Who is it? Damien Ward, he said. You remember me, I hope. A pause, then the sound of the chain sliding free. She opened the door fully, and for a moment, surprise flickered in her eyes. Part annoyance, part something softer. You came back. You said I could, he replied. She sighed, but there was no real anger in it. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I'm full of bad habits, he said. Sophie appeared behind her, beaming. You brought cookies? Damien grinned. Better. Breakfast. He held up a paper bag from a bakery down the street. Fresh croissants and orange juice. Doctor's orders. Elena folded her arms but couldn't hide the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. You really don't give people much choice, do you? Not when they skip meals and collapse in their kitchens, he said. Her laugh was quiet, reluctant. Come in then. The apartment was small but tidy. The furniture was mismatched, the wallpaper peeling, but everything felt lived in, real in a way Damien's penthouse had never been. He set the food down on the table while Sophie fetched plates. Elena poured orange juice into mismatched mugs. This isn't what billionaires usually do, is it? She asked lightly. What's that? Deliver breakfast to strangers in apartments that could fit inside their bathrooms. He shrugged. Maybe I'm redefining the brand. She raised an eyebrow. What? Philanthropy by croissant? He smiled faintly. Something like that. They ate quietly for a few minutes. Sophie hummed as she drew on a napkin with crayons, her small voice filling the silence that adults didn't know how to handle. After a while, Elena said softly, I looked you up. He didn't look surprised. And you're not just rich, she said. You're, famous. The kind of person people name buildings after. Not all of them stay standing, he said dryly. I also read about your foundation, she continued. You fund hospitals, right? Among other things. Her eyes darkened slightly. Including St. Maron's? He looked up sharply. Yes. Why? She hesitated, then said, I used to work there, before I was fired. That word hung in the air. Sophie was still humming, oblivious. What happened? He asked quietly. Elena's gaze dropped to the table. I filed a report about faulty equipment. A heart monitor failed during a pediatric surgery. The boy died. I thought it would lead to an investigation. She gave a bitter laugh. It led to my termination instead. Was it negligence? Damien asked. It was corruption, she said simply. The supplier was tied to a hospital executive. I raised the alarm. 2 weeks later, I was accused of falsifying paperwork and escorted out. He felt something inside him tighten. Did you keep the report? Her eyes flicked toward a small bookshelf near the corner. Yes, I couldn't throw it away. Damien stood, crossing the room. The folder was old, the edges curled, but neatly labeled. St. Marin's Incident Report, 2017. He flipped through the pages. Handwritten notes, malfunction logs, signatures. This could ruin careers, he murmured. It already ruined mine, she said quietly. He looked back at her. Do you know who supplied the equipment? Medcore Integrated, the same company that donated half their revenue to hospital foundations, including yours, I think. Damien froze. The name sparked immediate recognition. Medcore was one of the largest partners in his medical fund portfolio. Are you sure, he asked. I don't forget the name of the people who cost a child his life, she said. He set the folder down slowly. Then maybe I've been funding the wrong people. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Are you mad, Mr. Damien? He turned, forcing a smile. Not at you, sweetheart. Elena's voice softened. You don't have to get involved in this. It's old news. Nobody cared then, and nobody will now. He shook his head. Maybe they will if the right person makes them. People like you don't pick fights with corporations. You own them. Maybe that's why they'll listen. She frowned. Why do you care? He met her eyes, steady. Because your daughter called the wrong number, and maybe that wasn't an accident. Elena looked away, her voice low. You can't save everyone, Damien. He picked up the folder again. Maybe not, but I can start with one. Outside, the rain began to fall, a slow, steady rhythm against the cracked window pane. Inside, the air had changed. The wrong number had become a thread connecting two broken worlds, and Damien Ward was about to pull it until the truth unraveled. Damien spent the rest of the day with the file open on his desk. The words blurred together, dates, signatures, incident reports, but one name kept resurfacing like oil on water. Medcore Integrated. He'd seen it hundreds of times before in quarterly reports and donation contracts. It was a trusted supplier, praised for philanthropic alignment and ethical innovation. But now, staring at Elena's old documentation, he realized what it really was. A company profiting from silence. When his phone buzzed, he answered without looking. Jonas? His chief of operations sounded cautious. Yeah, boss. You don't usually pick up this fast. Something wrong? I need every record we have on Medcore Integrated, Damien said. Contracts, donations, vendor links, everything from the last 5 years. There was a pause. That's a big pull. Can I ask why? You can, Damien said, but I won't answer. Jonas gave a low whistle. Got it. Quiet mode. You want me to cross-check the internal fund transfers too? Yes, and Jonas. Don't tell anyone else you're doing this. Understood. Give me a few hours. By dusk, his private office was lit only by the city's reflection against the glass. He leaned back in his chair, reviewing the scanned documents Jonas had sent. They painted a picture he didn't want to believe. Inflated invoices, duplicate payments, consulting fees that disappeared into shell accounts. Every trail led to the same two signatures, Andrew Kalin, his CFO, and Charles Whitmore, his mentor and the foundation's chairman. Damien closed the file slowly, a muscle in his jaw tightening. For years, he'd trusted those men. Charles had helped him build the foundation that bore his family name. Kalin had balanced its books, but now the math was screaming what his conscience already knew. The empire he'd built to save lives was built, at least in part, on lies. He turned toward the window where the city shimmered beneath the rain. It looked different tonight, colder, smaller, less forgiving. The next morning, Damien drove back to Carter Street. He didn't know what he planned to say, only that Elena deserved to know what her courage had unearthed. When she opened the door, she looked surprised but not unwelcoming. Sophie peeked out from behind her leg, holding a half-eaten slice of toast. You again, Elena said. Either you're addicted to our coffee or you're here for something worse. Both, he admitted, holding up a bag. And I brought my own this time. She smirked faintly, stepping aside. Come in before my neighbor starts thinking you're my parole officer. Inside, the apartment smelled like cinnamon and old wood. Sophie disappeared into her bedroom, leaving them alone. Damien placed a tablet on the table. I found what happened to your report. Her expression shifted. What do you mean? He showed her a series of documents. Your findings reached the Foundation's audit board. Instead of forwarding them to the authorities, they were redirected to an internal review team. That team was led by Andrew Kalin. The report was then marked as resolved and sealed. Her brow furrowed. Sealed? On what grounds? Internal error, Damien said grimly. They erased the incident from official archives, and they did it under the guise of philanthropy, using my name. Elena sank into the nearest chair. So the boy, Connor, his death was buried? Yes, he said, and the people who did it are still drawing salaries. She looked up at him, something fierce flickering through her grief. You could expose them. I will, he said, but I need proof they can't dispute. You already have it. Not enough. They'll call your report circumstantial, say it's revenge from a disgruntled employee. I need something inside. Financial records, email chains, signed clearances. Elena hesitated. And if you go after them, he smiled without humor, then they'll come after me. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between them. Finally, Elena said, Why are you really doing this, Damien? You don't owe me anything. He studied her face, the exhaustion beneath her strength. Maybe not you, he said, but I owe myself the truth. Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. You could lose everything. Then maybe it wasn't worth keeping. Elena sighed. You talk like someone who's already given up. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm trying to remember what fighting looks like. When he left, the rain had started again, tapping softly against his car. He dialed Jonas as soon as he sat down. I need a meeting, Damien said. Private. Just you, me, and Charles Whitmore. Jonas hesitated. Charles? You sure? Yes, tonight. Understood. Damien ended the call and leaned back, the weight of it all pressing against his chest. He'd spent his life perfecting control, of markets, of people, of appearances. But this was chaos he couldn't buy his way out of. He started the car, glancing once more at the apartment window. Through the curtain, he could see Elena with Sophie in her arms, the faint outline of light wrapping them both. It was the kind of picture he didn't know he'd been missing until now. That night, he met Charles in the boardroom. The older man greeted him warmly, too warmly. Damien, my boy, Jonas said you wanted to talk. What's so urgent? Damien dropped the folder onto the table. Medcor. Charles's smile faltered. What about them? They've been siphoning money from our foundation, using shell accounts. Kalen's signatures are everywhere. So are yours. The silence that followed was sharp. Then Charles leaned back slowly. You've been digging where you shouldn't. I've been cleaning up what you left to rot. Charles's eyes hardened. Careful, Damien. The truth doesn't always pay dividends. Maybe not, he said, standing. But lies have a cost, too. As he walked out, he heard Charles's voice behind him, calm and dangerous. You're playing a game you can't win. Damien didn't turn around. Then I'll change the rules. The meeting with Charles echoed in Damien's mind long after he left the boardroom. The older man's voice, measured, patronizing, reverberated in the silence of his car as he sat parked outside his penthouse, staring at the skyline he'd once thought he owned. He wasn't sure when wealth had stopped feeling like power and started feeling like a cage. By morning, the decision was made. He would not let this rot stay hidden. When Damien arrived at his office, Jonas was already waiting, 2 coffees in hand and a laptop open to a maze of spreadsheets. You weren't exaggerating, Jonas said grimly. The audit logs are a mess. Kalen's been rerouting payments through a shell corporation under an international consultancy. Guess who owns it? Damien didn't have to guess. Charles Whitmore. Bingo. Jonas flipped the screen toward him. They use charitable disbursements as cover. The money goes from your foundation to Medcor for equipment procurement, then to a consultancy called Westlane Global, which just happens to share a tax ID with one of Whitmore's private trusts. Damien studied the numbers, the rows of sterile figures that translated to human suffering. How much? North of 12 million over 3 years, Jonas said. If the DOJ digs deep enough, they'll find both of them complicit in healthcare fraud. And since your signature's on the fund approvals, I'll take the fall with them, Damien said quietly. Jonas frowned. You don't have to go down for their crimes. You can claim ignorance. Hell, you could make that true. Nobody would blame you for walking away. Damien looked out the window at the city crawling below. I built this foundation to help people, Jonas. If I walk away now, it means it was all just business, and it wasn't supposed to be. That afternoon, Damien returned to Elena's apartment, the folder in his hands heavier than its weight. She opened the door before he could knock twice. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. If what you're doing is what I think, it's dangerous. He stepped inside anyway. So is staying quiet. She studied him for a moment. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, he admitted, and neither have the men responsible for this. He placed the folder on her kitchen table, flipping it open to reveal financial statements, scanned contracts, and forged signatures. I can prove your report was buried, and I can prove they used my name to launder millions through the same company that supplied those faulty monitors. Elena sank into a chair, her hand covering her mouth. You're serious. I'm past serious, Damien said. I'm going to expose them. Publicly. Her eyes widened. They'll destroy you. Maybe, but I'm done living behind press releases and charity dinners. People died, Elena. Children. Because I trusted the wrong men. Elena looked down at the evidence, the faint tremor in her hands betraying the conflict between justice and fear. And you need me. Yes, he said simply. Your testimony is the key. You were there when it happened. She stared at him, then at Sophie's crayon drawings on the fridge. Sunny skies, stick figures, hope. You have no idea what this will bring down on us. I do, he said quietly. That's why I'm asking, not demanding. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she exhaled shakily. If I agree, we do this on my terms. We go through proper channels, federal investigators, not tabloids. No grandstanding. Agreed, Damien said. Jonas is already compiling everything. Once it's complete, we'll send it to the Department of Justice. Elena nodded slowly. Then I'm in. 2 nights later, they met in Damien's private office. The blinds were drawn, the only light coming from the soft blue glow of the computer screens. Jonas worked silently, transferring files to an encrypted drive. This includes everything, he said. Financials, communications, even Kalen's offshore account details. If this doesn't bury them, nothing will. Elena hovered near the desk, uneasy. Once this goes out, there's no undoing it. That's the point, Damien said. Jonas inserted the final file, the progress bar creeping toward completion. When this sends, the DOJ and Federal Financial Crimes Unit will both get automatic encrypted copies. Elena looked at Damien. You're risking everything, your company, your reputation, on one act. He met her eyes. Then it'll be the first thing I've done that mattered. The computer beeped. Transfer complete. Jonas leaned back, exhaling. It's done. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence. Then Damien extended his hand toward Elena. Whatever happens after this, he said, I want you to know, I never would have seen it without you. She hesitated, then took his hand. You're not the man people think you are you? Not anymore, he said. When Elena and Jonas left, Damien stayed behind, staring at the city lights through the glass. He could already imagine the fallout. Board meetings, headlines, betrayals. His phone buzzed. A message from Charles Whitmore. We need to talk. Immediately. He typed back. There's nothing left to talk about. You'll see soon enough. As he set the phone down, the weight of his decision pressed against his chest. There would be no going back. But for the first time in years, Damien Ward didn't feel like a fraud in his own life. He felt something dangerously close to peace. The story broke before sunrise. Westwood Foundation under federal investigation. The headline crawled across every news screen in the city, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and bloodlust. Beneath it, Damien's face, calm, sharp, unyielding, flashed beside Charles Whitmore's and Andrew Kalen's. Jonas's phone had been vibrating nonstop since dawn. They're calling you the whistleblower billionaire, he said grimly, standing by Damien's office window. Not the catchiest title, but it's better than accomplice. Damien sat at his desk, silent. The storm he had unleashed was spreading faster than he'd imagined. Reporters were camped outside the foundation's glass doors. His legal team was panicking, sending carefully worded statements that he refused to read. What about the DOJ? He asked. They confirmed receipt of the files, Jonas said. And they've already frozen Medcor's accounts. Kalen's on the run. Whitmore's pretending he's never met you. Damien rubbed his temples. Of course he is. Jonas hesitated. You did the right thing, boss. But this is going to get ugly. I don't care if it gets ugly, Damien said. I just care that it gets true. By midday, the board called an emergency meeting. Damien walked into the conference room and felt the weight of every eye on him. Some furious, some afraid, all calculating. Charles wasn't there. His chair sat empty at the far end of the table, an absence louder than any accusation. One of the board members, a woman named Priya Singh, spoke first. Damien, you've put the entire organization at risk. The press is dissecting us like a cadaver. Donors are pulling out. Do you understand what you've done? He met her gaze evenly. I've stopped us from laundering blood money. Another voice cut in, sharp, male, indignant. You've burned down your own house. Maybe it deserved to burn, Damien replied. Gasps rippled across the room. Priya leaned forward. And what about your employees? The hospitals we fund? The patients? They'll suffer from the fallout. Damien's voice softened, but it didn't waver. They were already suffering. We just didn't want to look. The room fell silent. After a long pause, Priya sighed. The board will vote to suspend you as CEO pending investigation. You'll retain your personal shares, but you're no longer authorized to represent the foundation. He nodded slowly. I figured as much. Do you have anything else to say? Yes, he said. You can take my title, but you can't take my voice, and I intend to use it. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out before anyone could respond. Outside, the cameras swarmed him like bees. Questions flew from every direction. Mr. Ward, did you know about the fraud? Are you cooperating with the DOJ? Is it true you were involved in the cover-up? Who's the woman in the Medcor report? That last one froze him for half a second. They had found Elena's name. He forced his way through the crowd without answering, the flash of cameras like lightning in his eyes. Inside his SUV, Jonas turned from the driver's seat. They've identified her, Damien. Elena Ruiz, former nurse at St. Mary's. They're calling her the insider whistleblower. Where is she now? I called her. She's scared. Reporters are staking out her building. Damien's jaw clenched. Take me there. When they arrived at Carter Street, the press vans were already lined along the block. Microphones, flashbulbs, shouted questions. Jonas swore under his breath. They found her fast. Damien didn't hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouting, until he reached the door to apartment 3B. It opened before he could knock. Elena stood there, tired, angry, defiant. You brought them here, she said. No, he said quietly. They followed me. Her voice trembled. My daughter's terrified. They've been pounding on the door since morning. Sophie thinks she did something wrong. Damien's stomach twisted. I'll fix it. You can't fix this, she snapped. You promised anonymity. You promised she'd be safe. I didn't release your name. Someone in the DOJ or the board must have leaked it. I'm trying to what? She cut in. Be a hero? Expose corruption? Congratulations, you did. Now they're turning it into a circus, and my little girl is the headline. Her anger wasn't misplaced. It was the kind that comes from fear wearing armor. He took a step closer. I'll get her out of the city. I'll cover whatever you need. Security, relocation. I don't want your money, she said, voice breaking. I just want my life back. Damien's words faltered. Elena. But before he could finish, Sophie peeked out from behind her mother's leg, her small face pale. Mommy, are they gone? Elena turned, softening instantly. Almost, baby. Go back to your room. Sophie looked at Damien and whispered, You said you'd make things better. Her words hit harder than any accusation. I'm trying, he said, his voice low. She studied him with a child's devastating honesty. Then try harder. That night, Damien didn't go home. He sat alone in his office, the city spread out like a map of consequences below. Jonas called twice, but Damien ignored it. He couldn't face another briefing, another crisis management plan. All he could see was Sophie's face, her faith, her fear. At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jonas. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered. A familiar voice rasped on the other end. You should have left it alone, Damien. Charles, he said quietly. You think you've won something? You haven't. You've just painted a target on everyone you care about. Damien's voice hardened. You're done, Charles. Walk away before they drag you out in handcuffs. A low chuckle. You think I'm the villain, but you were the one signing the checks. The line went dead. Damien sat in the dark for a long time, the city's hum bleeding into silence. He knew then that the hardest part hadn't begun yet. The storm that Damien had unleashed didn't fade. It evolved. By the next morning, media outlets were devouring every scrap of information about the scandal. Every broadcast, every news feed, every trending tag bore his name. The billionaire who turned himself in. The nurse who exposed a system. The scandal that shook modern philanthropy. But beneath the headlines, something darker was brewing. Jonas barged into Damien's office before sunrise, face pale and phone in hand. It's Kalen, he said. He's flipped. Damien looked up slowly from the reports he'd been reading. What do you mean, flipped? He cut a deal with the DOJ. He's giving them everything, except he's rewriting the story. He's saying you knew, that you orchestrated the transfers to cover your own debts, that Elena was your mistress, planted to fabricate sympathy. Damien froze. That's insane. It doesn't matter if it's insane, Jonas said. It's plausible, and once the press runs with it, he trailed off. Damien stood, the weight in his chest turning to steel. Then I'll tell the truth myself. Damien, they'll crucify you. He met Jonas's gaze. Then let them. The press conference was called for noon. Reporters flooded the marble lobby of the Westwood Foundation headquarters, microphones raised, cameras flashing. Damien stood at the podium alone. No PR handlers, no teleprompter, no script. He waited for silence, then began. I built this foundation to help people, he said, to give back what this world gave me. But somewhere along the way, I stopped looking at where the money went. I trusted people who didn't deserve it, and that trust cost lives. Flashes went off like gunfire. I won't hide behind lawyers or press statements. I won't pretend ignorance is innocence. What happened at St. Mary's Hospital was wrong. A child died because a system failed him, and that system had my name on it. The questions came fast. Did you embezzle the money? No. Are you admitting negligence? Yes. Is it true you're protecting a woman named Elena Ruiz? He paused. I'm protecting the truth. She risked everything to reveal what I ignored. A ripple moved through the crowd. More flashes, more noise. Then suddenly a man's voice from the back. Cool, confident, venomous. And what about your mentor, Mr. Ward? Will you be throwing him under the bus too? Every camera turned toward the speaker. Charles Whitmore stood there impeccably dressed, his expression that of a man who'd come to bury, not defend. Mr. Whitmore, one reporter said breathlessly, were you aware of Mr. Ward's involvement? Charles smiled faintly. I was aware of his ambitions. Damien has always been good at appearing noble when it serves him. The crowd buzzed. Damien's pulse roared in his ears. You're lying, Damien said, his voice steady but cold. Am I? Charles took a step forward, voice smooth as oil. The Department of Justice has copies of your signature on every transfer. I merely trusted your judgment. You were the one signing checks to shell accounts. You forged my name. Charles chuckled softly. An interesting claim. I suppose we'll let the court decide whose word holds more weight. He turned to the cameras. It's tragic, really. A man so desperate to absolve himself that he drags everyone else down with him. The room erupted. Questions flew, voices clashing. Damien stood motionless. For the first time, he realized that Charles hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been preparing for this moment. He'd built the entire empire to survive without its creator. By evening, the internet was on fire. Half the world saw Damien as a traitor, the other half as a fallen hero. Stocks plummeted. Partners withdrew. The foundation board voted to suspend all operations pending investigation. Jonas found him standing by the window, looking out over the city that had once been his kingdom. "They'll bury you with paperwork," Jonas said quietly. "Charles is feeding them every half-truth he can twist." "I know. Then what's the move?" Damien turned. "The move is to stop playing defense." He picked up the encrypted drive from his desk, the one Jonas had built to store their files. "This is every document Kalin and Whitmore thought they destroyed. The original audit logs, the metadata, even the deleted chain of emails that tie them to Medcore." Jonas blinked. "You're planning to leak it?" "No," Damien said. "Elena is." That night he met Elena in a small cafe far from the city center. She looked tired, worn down by the attention, but her eyes still carried that same unbreakable fire. "They turned on you," she said. "They were always going to," he replied, "but that's not what matters anymore. This," he slid the encrypted drive across the table, "this is what will end it. Kalin, Whitmore, Medcore, all of them." She stared at it, then at him. "If I do this, it won't just destroy them. It'll destroy you too." "I know. Why?" "Because you deserve to walk free," he said quietly, "and I deserve to answer for what I ignored." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to be the villain in your own redemption story." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the only way it works." Elena reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You're a stubborn man, Damien Ward, and you're braver than anyone I've ever met." They sat there in silence for a long time, two people who had met by accident and ended up unraveling a world together. Finally, she took the drive. "I'll send it tonight." He nodded. "Then it's done." As she walked out into the rain, Damien watched her go, aware that he had just handed over the last piece of his empire. The city lights reflected in the puddles outside, fractured and beautiful. He knew that by morning, everything would fall apart. But maybe, just maybe, something better would rise from what remained. The next morning, the world awoke to a storm it couldn't turn away from. At 6:14 a.m., a series of encrypted files hit the inboxes of major news outlets and federal investigators. Within an hour, every media channel was broadcasting the same breaking story. New evidence confirms systematic fraud within the Westwood Foundation and its affiliates, linking executives directly to Medcore Integrated. By 8 a.m., both Charles Whitmore and Andrew Kalin were in custody. Damien watched the coverage in silence from his penthouse. The TV cast flickering light across the room, painting his face in shades of blue and gray. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. He didn't need to. The noise outside, the protests, the cameras, the helicopters, had become part of the air itself. Jonas burst into the room, half breathless. "It worked. The files are verified. DOJ confirmed authenticity within minutes. They've frozen Whitmore's offshore accounts. Kalin's trying to plea his way out, but it's over." Damien didn't respond. Jonas frowned. "You don't look like a man who just won." Damien's eyes stayed on the screen, where news anchors replayed footage of Charles being led in handcuffs through a sea of flashing bulbs. "It's not a win," he said quietly. "It's justice. And justice doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like relief." Jonas hesitated. "You should know. The DOJ's naming you in the final report. They'll clear you of fraud, but they're holding you responsible for oversight failures." "I expected that," Damien said. "They're right. Public opinion might not agree. Half the country thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're the architect of the whole thing." "Maybe I was both," Damien murmured. Jonas sighed. "Elena did good, Damien. She risked everything sending that leak. She's in hiding now. Media pressure got too heavy." Damien's gaze sharpened. "Where?" "She wouldn't say. She wanted to disappear for a while. Said you'd understand." He did. She'd already given too much. By afternoon, the city was sweltering under late summer heat, the kind that clung to skin and memory alike. Damien walked through the streets without his usual entourage, cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding a face the world suddenly recognized too well. For the first time in years, he moved anonymously, not as a billionaire, not as a brand, not as a man insulated by money, just a person trying to breathe in the wreckage of his own creation. He passed a newsstand where a headline shouted, "The man who exposed himself, Damian Ward's fall and redemption." He stopped, staring at the photo beneath it, himself beside Elena at the hospital weeks earlier, her eyes full of quiet defiance. The vendor looked up. "Crazy story, huh? You think that guy's a crook or a saint?" Damian smiled faintly. "Probably both," the man laughed. "Ain't that the truth?" That evening, Damian drove out of the city for the first time in weeks. The air grew cleaner, the noise faded, and the skyline gave way to open roads and quiet hills. He didn't have a destination, just a direction: west, away from everything. By nightfall, he reached a small coastal town where the sea stretched endlessly under the dark. He parked near the pier, stepping out into the salt, thick air. The ocean had always been his escape, the one place where the world didn't need him to be anyone. He walked to the end of the dock, where an old fisherman sat mending nets under a dim light. The man looked up and nodded in greeting, but didn't speak. For a long time, Damian just stood there, staring at the horizon. The waves rolled in slow and steady, like the pulse of something ancient that couldn't be bribed or broken. He thought of Elena, how her hands had shaken when she signed the report years ago, how she'd been punished for doing the right thing, how she'd still found the courage to try again. He thought of Sophie's small voice saying, "You said you'd make things better." He whispered into the wind, "I hope I did." His phone buzzed. It was Jonas. "They're holding a press briefing tomorrow," Jonas said. "The DOJ is officially closing the Medcore investigation. Whitmore and Kalin are facing life sentences. You should be there." Damian watched the waves break. "It's not my story anymore, Jonas. It's yours more than anyone's. You started it." "I was just the man who answered the wrong call," Damian said quietly. Jonas hesitated. "And maybe that was the right one?" The next morning, Damian did go back, not for cameras or headlines, but to the hospital where everything had begun. The same emergency entrance, the same faint smell of disinfectant and fear. He walked through the halls until he found the children's wing, where a nurse recognized him and froze. "Mr. Ward, you—" He raised a hand gently. "I'm not here for attention. I just want to visit the foundation wing." She nodded, leading him down the corridor. The plaque outside the newly renovated ward gleamed under the morning light. The Connor L. Memorial Pediatric Unit, restored through the integrity of those who spoke the truth. Below it, in smaller letters, "Donated anonymously." Damian traced the inscription with his fingers. He'd asked for his name to be removed months ago, but seeing it now, he felt the meaning more deeply than ownership ever could. He turned to the nurse. "The boy, Connor, do you know his family?" "They moved away," she said softly, "but his mother still sends thank you letters every year." Damian smiled faintly. "Good." He stood there for a while, letting the moment breathe. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was carrying the world. He just felt human. As he left, he passed a child sitting by the window, small, brown-haired, drawing on a napkin with crayons. She looked up, grinned, and waved. "Hi, mister," she said. He waved back. "Hi, kiddo." And just like that, the world felt a little lighter. The weeks that followed unfolded in slow motion. The world moved on from the scandal faster than Damian expected. Headlines shifted, new controversies rose, and the billionaire who had once been the center of every broadcast became just another name in yesterday's news cycle. But in the quiet corners of the city, the ripple effects remained. Hospitals began auditing their suppliers. Foundations reviewed their donations. People, ordinary people, were asking questions again. Damian didn't need applause. The silence was enough. He'd resigned officially 2 weeks after the DOJ's announcement. The statement had been short. No interviews, no defense, no grand gesture. "I take full responsibility for the failures that occurred under my watch. My position was one of privilege. It should have been one of vigilance." Now his days were unstructured for the first time in decades. He rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor, far from the penthouse and its echoes of ambition. The walls were bare except for a single photo, one Sophie had drawn the day after the investigation ended. It showed three stick figures, a woman, a little girl, and a tall man in a black suit standing under a bright sun. Above them, in crayon-scrawled letters, she'd written, "We fixed it." Damien looked at it every morning before making his coffee. It was a reminder, not of redemption, but of responsibility. One rainy evening, Jonas showed up unannounced, dripping water onto the floor. "You look terrible," Damien said, half smiling. Jonas smirked. "You should see traffic." He tossed a manila envelope onto the table. "You're not gonna like this." Damien opened it. Inside were printouts of an article draft. The headline read, "Anonymous source alleges billionaire's relationship with whistleblower nurse." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, Charles's people? Maybe, or one of the board members trying to muddy the waters? Damien exhaled. "Elena doesn't need this." Jonas nodded. "She's still off the grid. I've been keeping tabs through a friend at the DOJ. She and Sophie relocated under a protection order until the press cools off." "Good," Damien said softly. Jonas hesitated. "You could clear it up, you know. Hold an interview. Tell your side before someone else does." Damien shook his head. "Every time I speak, people stop listening to her. The truth should belong to her now, not to me." Jonas frowned. "You can't carry the weight of every headline." "I'm not trying to," Damien said, his voice calm. "I'm just learning when silence does more good than noise." A few days later, a letter arrived, handwritten. The return address was a small coastal town in Oregon. He recognized the looping handwriting instantly. "Dear Damien, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write it anyway. Sophie started school this week. She told her teacher she wants to be a doctor who never ignores broken machines. I thought you'd like that. We've been staying near the ocean. It's quiet here, peaceful. Sometimes too quiet, but maybe that's what healing sounds like. I saw the photo of the pediatric wing. You didn't sign your name, but I knew it was you. Thank you for that. It made everything worth it. You once told me you didn't know how to fight for the right thing. I think you do now. Be well, Damien." E. He read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it in the drawer of his desk. Then he looked out the window, watching rain trace thin silver lines down the glass. For the first time, the world outside didn't feel like a battlefield. That night, he took a walk along the harbor. The water was calm, reflecting the city lights in scattered patterns. A child's laughter echoed from the boardwalk nearby. And for a moment, he thought of Sophie again. Her tiny hand gripping his, her bright certainty that the world could be fixed with enough effort. He wondered if she'd remember him. He hoped not as the billionaire who caused chaos, but as the man who showed up when she called the wrong number. The thought made him smile. He passed a cafe, warm light spilling out from the windows. A small TV inside was playing a news report about philanthropic reform legislation. The Ward Act, someone had dubbed it online. It mandated transparency in foundation funding, stricter oversight on charitable donations, and criminal liability for corporate misuse. He paused at the door, listening to the anchor say his name, then shook his head and walked away. He didn't want credit. He wanted permanence. As he reached the edge of the pier, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and rain. Damien stood there for a long time, coat whipping in the breeze, staring out into the dark water. He thought about his father, who had taught him that success was control. He thought about the empire he'd built from that lesson, and the truth he'd finally learned. Real power wasn't control at all. It was surrender. He had surrendered everything that defined him: wealth, image, certainty, and in that loss, he'd found something that felt dangerously close to peace. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for answering that call. E." He smiled, pocketed the phone, and turned back toward the city lights. Tomorrow would come, loud and relentless. But for tonight, the world was quiet enough to let him breathe. A year later, the city had changed, and so had Damien Ward. The glass towers he once ruled from now bore new banners. Ward Foundation had been renamed the Connor Initiative. Its new board consisted of doctors, nurses, and engineers, the people who actually saved lives instead of profiting from them. Damien no longer held a title there. He'd declined every offer to return. But on quiet mornings when he passed the building, The guard still nodded respectfully, as if to say, "You built this. You made it honest." He didn't stop to bask in it. He kept walking. These days, Damien lived a quieter life on the outskirts of the city, near the coastline. His mornings started with black coffee and a walk along the dunes. The locals knew him only as Mr. Ward, the man who always tips too much and talks too little. He liked it that way. Sometimes he'd sit at the cafe near the harbor where fishermen traded stories, and people would argue about the news, about politicians, about billionaires and scandals. No one recognized him under the stubble and sun-bleached jacket, and for the first time, anonymity didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace. He'd traded applause for quiet, and the quiet suited him. One afternoon in early autumn, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was pale blue, the handwriting small and neat. He didn't need to check the signature to know who it was from. "Dear Damien, I hope this finds you well. Sophie's birthday is next week. She'll be 7. She still talks about the man with the black car who brought breakfast and fixed everything. I stopped correcting her. It's a better story that way. She's thriving. She got into a science fair with a project on heart monitors. She said, 'I'm going to build ones that don't break when kids need them most.' I cried, obviously. Then I laughed because she said she'd name it the Ward Monitor. If you're ever near the coast again, come by. The lighthouse still works, and Sophie keeps leaving seashells on the steps, in case he visits. You told me once you weren't sure if you could be good. I think you already are." Damien closed the letter and smiled. The sea outside his window shimmered like it had overheard the words and decided to agree. He folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the drawing Sophie had given him years ago, the one with the crayon sun and the words, "We fixed it." That weekend, he drove north along the coastline, following the winding road that hugged the cliffs. The farther he went, the lighter he felt, as if every mile peeled away another layer of guilt. By the time he reached the lighthouse, the sun was setting, painting the water in copper and gold. A small figure was sitting on the steps, knees hugged to her chest, hair tangled by the wind. When she saw the car pull up, she jumped to her feet and waved. "Mom, he came!" Elena stepped out from behind the door, her expression a mix of shock and warmth. "You actually found us." "I got good directions," he said, holding up the letter with a faint smile. She shook her head, laughing softly. "You always did show up when least expected." Sophie ran toward him, holding out something in her hand, a small, perfect seashell. "I saved one for you." He crouched down to take it. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful." She grinned. "It's lucky. You keep it, okay?" "I will," he promised. Later, they sat on the porch overlooking the ocean. The lighthouse beam swept lazily across the waves, steady and rhythmic. Elena handed him a cup of tea. "I watched your interview last month," she said. "You talked about systemic reform like a professor." He chuckled. "I was nervous. You didn't look it. Maybe that's because I wasn't pretending anymore." Elena smiled faintly. "You really did it, Damien. You turned the system against itself." He shook his head. "You did. I just followed your lead." For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the ocean breathe. Then she said quietly, "You know, sometimes I think Sophie's wrong about you." He glanced over. "How so?" "She thinks you fixed everything, but I think you just reminded the world it could be fixed." He stared out at the horizon. The last light was fading, and the stars were beginning to appear. "Maybe that's enough," he said. "It is," she replied. Sophie had fallen asleep inside, curled on the couch with a blanket and her notebook of sketches. On the first page, in uneven handwriting, she'd written, "One call can change everything." Elena stood at the door, watching Damien look at it. "She still thinks the world runs on miracles." He smiled. "Maybe it does." Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The lighthouse beam turned, its light sweeping over them both, steady and unbroken. For the first time in years, Damien didn't feel like a man haunted by what he'd done. He felt like a man who had learned to listen, to the quiet, to the truth, to the second chances life rarely gives. He turned toward Elena. "You know," he said, "that wrong number, it wasn't so wrong after all." She met his gaze, smiling softly. "No, it never was." They stood there together as the light turned again, tracing a path across the sea. A reminder that even in darkness, some things kept shining. And for Damien Ward, that was enough.